a dozen people on this webinar today, so thank you for being here. My name is Alexis Bucknam. I'm the Executive Director of Utah Campus Compact. We're located here in Salt Lake City. I'm very pleased to have three of my esteemed colleagues from across the state who've agreed to serve as presenters today on the Civic Action Plan, What Have We Learned webinar. So let me tell you, just briefly introduce each of them. They'll each do a few moments of presenting their slides, and then we'll have question and answer at the end, as I stated earlier. So our first presenter is Kristen Brubaker from Utah State University. She's the Community Engaged Learning Specialist there, and she has been with us a few years, so we're really excited. Utah State is a research-intensive university, as well as being the land-grant institution for the state of Utah. Our second presenter is Lucy Smith, and she is the Engaged Learning Coordinator for Salt Lake Community College. We have two two-year institutions in the state of Utah, Salt Lake Community College being one of them. And then we have several regional comprehensive universities that serve in both a community college and university role, which leads me to our third presenter, because Weber State University, where Brenda Marsteller-Kowaleski is the Associate Provost for High Impact Programs and Faculty Development, is one of those regional comprehensives. And we thought it was really important to include these three different institutional types on this webinar, so that those of you who are calling in can get a sense of some of the different issues that have emerged and what learning has emerged. A lot of it, I think, also will apply to just about any institution of higher education. So hopefully it will be a valuable use of your time. So with that, I'm going to turn off my video and my mic so that we can turn the time over to Kristen, and she will get us started. So Kristen, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. Just to make sure, can everyone see my screen? My PowerPoint? Okay, awesome. So as Alexa said, my name is Kristen Brubaker, and I'm a Community Engagement Specialist, as well as our coordinator for Community Engaged Learning on our Community Engaged Scholars Program with the Center for Civic Engagement and Service Learning, which is housed in Student Affairs at USU. And Utah State University is the state's only land-grant university, and as such, community engagement in serving Utah communities has been part of our mission from the start. Community engagement efforts and the Civic Action Plan in turn align with this mission. So we were really excited to have the chance to work on the Civic Action Plan and just sort of continue our engagement in this way. Additionally, USU is planning on applying for the 2020 Carnegie Community Engagement classification. So our Civic Action Plan largely focused on preparing the institution for the Carnegie application. More than anything, we considered what could help us be better prepared for the application and what action can we take now that would then make our application more competitive. So we really framed our entire Civic Action Plan around the Carnegie application. So just a quick overview of USU. Although we're not the largest university in the state, in some ways we're probably one with the most extensive touch. We have 33 campuses, 3 residential campuses, plus 30 regional campuses and centers, and that's in addition to our growing distance education program. We also manage the state's extension program, which has offices in 28 of the 29 Utah counties, as well as providing state library support. And really, these extension programs, unlike some in other states, are built upon community engagement and really upon reciprocity. So they largely are built, the programs that they work on are built around the greatest needs in each county as defined by the people in the county. And as I already mentioned, community engagement is built into the mission of the university, and you can just see that through the amount of non-curricular student-led groups that are actually committed to some sort of service, and almost all of our student groups do have a service requirement involved. Overall, I've been at USU now for about 2 years, and what I can say is that there's a lot happening both at the Logan campus as well as our many other campuses and our extension. And it's hard as someone who came in from the outside to really understand the scope of work. And so that's another thing I was aiming to achieve with the Civic Action Plan, was to find a way to start to sort of funnel all of the community engagement activities to a single office, my office, so that we could comprehensively share USU's involvement. So with that in mind, the Civic Action Planning team developed a survey to be sent to deans, department heads, program directors, our regional campuses, to gather information on what USU was already currently doing well as identify areas where improvement could happen. In addition to that, our planning team was made up of key administrators, as well as a lot of other important stakeholders who had a unique view of the campus's engagement efforts. And finally, we used an external tool, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a bit later. And from this baseline review, USU identified 3 main goals that our Civic Action Plan would address. First of all, we'd like to provide incentives for community engagement, and this would mainly work to incentivize faculty, mainly through tenure and promotion recognition, funding opportunities, designation of classes as general ed requirements, etc. Second, we would like to align engagement opportunities across programs on campus to create collaboration and awareness. And really what we wanted to see with this goal was more that community engagement would become part of the whole USU experience rather than an unconnected piece. So we really wanted to make sure that every student had that community engagement piece and saw all of these different activities as part of the whole. And then lastly, we are committed to tracking and assessing community engagement. As I mentioned, we know that so much is happening at USU, not only at Logan, but with our regional campuses and centers and our wonderful extension program. But when we were doing the Civic Action Plan, there wasn't really a formal way to gather this data or assess anything. And we realized that it's really key to having that data if we want to tell the full story of USU. So immediately after finishing the plan, I was able to use it to actually garner awareness and engagement regarding Carnegie. Starting this past summer, I set up meetings with our deans, department heads, extension, assessment officers, and started collaborating on what next steps would look like. I was able to present at the President's Executive Council, which then led to being able to secure different meetings with our deans. And in many cases, these then led to additional meetings and additional meetings and additional meetings, and we're still having them. The goal of these meetings, more than anything, was to first of all raise awareness of the Civic Action Plan, to tell them what we had decided, to celebrate the fact that we finished the plan and all of the lessons that we learned, but also to use it to start to develop a task force for Carnegie specifically. And it was actually really quite interesting because timing-wise, it really wasn't the best. Our Civic Action Plan was finished in March of last year. I started setting up these meetings during the summer, and so it was a hard ask to say, hey, I'm going to need someone for my task force in approximately 9 months from now. They didn't know who was going to be available or really what that would look like. But if nothing else, it brought Carnegie up to people. It made the deans, department heads more knowledgeable, and it was actually really refreshing to see how many people were on board and engaged in the process. And it actually led to some really interesting conversations, because I've had quite a few people email me and say, oh, hey, I heard about this Carnegie thing, I'd love to meet with you. Or, oh, I heard there's a task force coming up in a few months, can you notify me about it? This was surprising. I was expecting to really have to be knocking on doors, and in some cases people were coming to me instead. So that was a bonus. I was also able to use these conversations to bring up an area where I think USU has room to improve, and that has a lot of valuable, or a lot of, it will be very valuable in the Carnegie application, which is community engaged learning. And this actually led to a handful of new courses being designated. It led to more conversations with faculty who were already CEL faculty saying, oh, I didn't know I needed to do this, or I need to update my form. So it just added a little bit more discussion. And really what we saw there is by framing Carnegie as something that the president and provost wanted, we saw more faculty get involved and really be persuaded to consider adding a service learning component to their class. With the momentum of the Civic Action Plan, we were also finally able to sign a contract with OrgSync. So this was really wonderful. It didn't happen after the Civic Action Plan. I was able to host a meeting with a range of different department heads on campus who I thought would benefit from using OrgSync about a year ago this time. So it was in the midst of actually developing the plan. And everyone came together, heard about the tool, thought it was going to be a wonderful thing. And at this time, we were actually able to raise enough funds that my department is really contributing a very small percentage for the database, which was really great. So AccuSync, as we're calling it, was set up this summer and rolled out for fall semester. Because of a few factors, we weren't able to do a big launch, so the system has really grown in popularity more organically. As of last week, we have about 650 plus students regularly using the database, and they've already logged over 6,000 hours of engagement, which is great, but in comparison, spring 2017, we saw a total of only 363 students logging an hour of 16,000 hours. So we're definitely down on the hours, but we're seeing more people logging on and utilizing it, which I think is one step in the right direction. And sort of to further this, although nothing's been signed yet, it looks like based off of our experience, our student involvement office will actually be moving to Engage, which will allow our systems to sync a little bit better, and hopefully we're going to see larger adoption when the entire campus starts to be moving towards OrgSync and Engage instead of just the service module. But we're looking forward to that as well. And then a few of my lessons learned from this. First off, a solid team is key to the Civic Action Plan development. Because of the people we were able to involve on the team, I think we were able to get more action and see more done. And really having administrators was key, but also faculty who could talk about concerns on the ground. We also invited our public relations and marketing director to be involved, which was really great because he was able to hear about all of our different incentives and say, oh, this is how I would enact this, and this is how you can get a little bit more attention or awareness on campus. It was also important not to have the team be too large. There were months when my agenda, we would only get halfway through it because we talked about some subject and it would just go off and there'd be too many voices to be heard, which was wonderful to see everyone engaged. It was actually a challenge for me. I would have liked to have a larger team so we could have had a more comprehensive view of the campus. And again, not only the Logan campus, but all of our regional campuses in extension. I think that might have allowed us to put together a more comprehensive Civic Action Plan. But with the administrators that we have, the provost and the director or the vice president of student affairs, I feel like they were hopefully able to represent these different groups who weren't able to be involved. My team was about 8 members, I think, including myself. So not a large team at all, and sometimes it was a struggle even with that many. And then I'd also say, just team-wise, I'd also use the action planning process to get their continued buy-in. Determine then and there who will take responsibility for these next steps. So then they really have to continue past that period of time. And again, this is a lesson I wish that I had learned beforehand. We decided at a certain point to disband for a period of time just because of summer and a few other things. And since that time, getting everyone back together and sort of continuing on the motion that we already had has been harder. And I feel like we sort of stopped that forward motion. So I would change that going back on that. The second biggest lesson learned was to determine what tool you might use when completing an assessment of your current status. So I mentioned we did a survey that went out, we used the administrators, and then we also used an outside tool. And that outside tool was really great because it was something that I felt we could use long term. There's a lot of tools out there asking for different data or encouraging alternative focus areas. And for us, it was really important for us to find a single tool that we could use when doing the baseline in 2016, as well as something that would still be relevant when we're assessing how we're doing in 2021. In our case, we used a tool that was developed by a task force of Utah Campus Compact and participants from a handful of Utah schools led by Alexis. And full disclosure, I was on that task force, so I had a little bit extra impotence in using this. But it was sort of written for the Civic Action Plan specifically, or the planning process. And for us, we wrote it into our Civic Action Plan. So hopefully it's something that now we have the buy-in so that we can use over the upcoming years, instead of every single time saying, oh, well, we could use this tool, but is it really relevant any longer? So just really quickly, I wanted to share the tool. And it was developed by sort of lumping together multiple other tools that we felt were most prevalent in tracking engagement over a period of time in between campuses. It was structured using Barbara Holland's levels of commitment to community engagement, and then adding some sections to identify next steps and work needed. And in addition to the Holland Matrix, other tools that we pulled from included the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification Framework, the President's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll, the Council for Advancement of Standards in Higher Education, and Hawk Center for Public Service, Public Pathways. And this is just an example of one of the different categories. It's a screenshot of USU's assessment specifically, so you can see where we think we're doing well, where there's some priority areas, and where we want to focus going forward on there. In addition, this one is institutional identity and culture, mission leadership, external communication. In addition to that, it also looks at organizational structure, community involvement, outreach partnerships, quantitative measurements, curricular engagement, diversity, equality, and access, promotion, tenure and hiring, and community outreach. And I'm sure Alexis would be happy to share this tool with anyone who is interested in it, just as a plug. If you think this is something that you would like for your school Civic Action Plan, it's something that we do have publicly available now. And then in addition to the categories on the last slide and the ones that I mentioned, there is a section of the tool to help you plan specifically for your Civic Action Plan based off of your answers. And so we use the first section of the tool at USU. We sort of use the first section of the tool, but didn't necessarily complete this part that you're looking at now, as our Civic Action Plan was already in draft form by the time the tool was released. But the tool also covers accreditation themes, if that's relevant, and a plan of action to help you break down the bigger goals to specific tasks, activities, place, timeline, action. It has a lot of different things. So that would be sort of my two big lessons learned is, first of all, obviously that team development is really big. And then just finding a tool that works for you. This one worked fabulously for me, but obviously it's not going to work for every campus. And maybe I had an additional understanding of the tool because I was in the team who helped sort of design it to a certain extent. But that worked well. And then the third thing that I would say, sort of looking back at the CAP as a whole, we've developed some sub-goals or specific action steps we'll be moving towards in the coming months, but we purposefully left some steps vague. And I thought that was important for us as well, because it really allows us to determine the next steps dependent on the context, the timing, the buy-in we receive around campus. And this is especially key, just knowing that we're moving towards Carnegie. The focus that we have in Carnegie might sort of shift our Civic Action Plan goals just a tiny bit. And so having that flexibility was really large in, giving us a firm footing in larger picture goals, but the opportunity to remain creative and really have the opportunity to bring different groups across our campuses together to achieve the Civic Action Plan goals and become Carnegie community engaged. I think that is it for me. So I will give back the screen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen. There was one quick question that it's probably easy for you to answer now, which is Did you solicit input from the campus in other ways than the survey, in a systematic way, such as focus groups, town halls, etc.?
We didn't do that too much. Specifically looking at the timing, we were trying to keep to that year goal. And so we didn't feel like we had a lot of time. And then also working through the administrators we had, what I did in a lot of cases is ask them to go out and talk to the department heads, et cetera, to sort of have that little bit of focus group, but not do it in quite as formalized as a way. Instead, for them to go talk to who they thought that they needed to talk to and bring us back that information in future meetings.
Great, thank you. All right, well, we're, thank you so much, Kristen, and we're moving right along, and Lucy has already pulled up her slides, so I'm gonna turn the time over to her. Oh, one other thing, if you're interested in that tool, you can email me, and I put it in the chat box at Alexis, ALEXIS, B as in boy, at utahcompact.org. So if you send that to me, I can send that along right away. And Lucy, go right ahead.
Okay, great. So everybody can see my screen and hear me okay? Yes, okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up and some nods. So thank you everybody again. I'm Lucy Smith and I'm with Salt Lake Community College, and I also have several other colleagues who are on the joining the webinar who have helped with the Civic Action Plan, and I'll give a nod to them as I go through this presentation. So we are one of the largest community college, the largest community college in the state, and one of the largest community colleges in the nation. We serve almost 60,000 students a year, and we have 10 campuses across the state. So we are a large institution. And the Civic Action Plan has been really exciting work. And so we, essentially what we have done is we broke the Civic Action Plan into 3 different components. And we have a nice brochure that we are passing out that we're using, that we're giving to folks to be able to talk about the Civic Action Plan. And within it, there are 3 basic sections. So we basically, community is one of our values. And we use that as a lens to be able to strengthen our community and also educate our students. And then as another part of our plan, we have our 5 action strategies, which I'll go through here in just a moment. And those are our main basic umbrellas or the buckets under which we're trying to work for this plan. And then we also have implementation principles and practices regarding how we're moving forward with this work in a collaborative manner. So our vision essentially is to be a model for inclusive and transformative education, strengthening the communities we serve through our students. And we are, excuse me, an engaged campus, and we received the Carnegie classification in 2015. My colleague Jen Seltzer-Stitt led the efforts on that and did a fabulous job. And we are similar to what Kristen has said. We're also using the Civic Action Plan in part to help us mobilize for the re-up that we'll do for Carnegie for the next round. So our commitment to engagement is central to our mission, vision, and values. And community engagement is an educational strategy and a way for us to move forward on our institutional goals regarding transfer preparation, increased student completion, aligning with workforce needs, and achieving equity in student participation and completion. Equally important, it's a way for the college to demonstrate to our communities and to the students that we serve that we value them and we work to serve common interests. So as I mentioned, community is one of our values. We actually have 7, but I've highlighted on this slide the 3 that I feel best align with community. So our 7 values, I'll just read them off even though they're not listed on the slide. And the first 3 is collaboration, and then community, inclusivity, learning, innovation, integrity, and trust. And so these values essentially are woven throughout, should be woven throughout everything that we do at the college, and that is how we're leveraging many of our community aspects. Okay, so without further ado, the 5 action strategies. Okay, so our first one is to structure, it's curricular in nature and focused on high impact practices. So using high impact practices as the umbrella, because there's many other initiatives on campus that are trying to move forward high impact practices. And service learning, of course, is one of those. And so we are working to further target faculty development efforts on high impact practices, further encourage development of courses that use high impact practices. We have an e-portfolio initiative across campus, and we just changed our platform. We've moved to Digication. And so we are building in templates within Digication for both student and faculty e-portfolios that better help faculty talk about the high impact practices they're doing and highlighting their work, and also help students better talk about their community engaged work and also tag it so that we can assess it a little better. And I'll talk about the assessment piece here in just a little bit. And then in addition, a collaborative work team, and that's the structure under which major strategic initiatives move forward at the college. So a CWT, collaborative work team, was focused on pathways. And pathways, it has 2 components. And this is actually, there's many colleges around the nation that are doing this, but the 2 components are to use research-based design principles to re-engineer the student intake, advising, and support experience. So that's on the student affairs side. And then second, the development of 8 new first-year course sequences that lead to associate degrees within each pathway. And these entrance sequences and associate degree programs are guided by a common framework for curriculum, instruction, advising, assessment, and a learning climate. But the main kicker of this is that it includes deliberate and integrated use of high impact practices. So again, meeting mutual goals, that we have several groups and committees and strategies that are working to better align what we're doing and use high impact practices, including service learning. And service learning is actually called out in the Pathways material as one of those means under which they want to move this initiative forward. So I'm going to kind of weave lessons learned throughout my presentation. And the lesson learned with this one is influencing entrenched college frameworks and faculty structures requires very heavy lifting. Probably everybody on this call knows that. But being able to strengthen community engagement, service in rank and tenure is heavy work that's going to take us some time. And I feel fortunate that some of the other structures, the major structures that are changing at the college, do include service learning as one of the strategies to help engage our students. Okay, so number 2, our second action strategy is to implement a new civic literacy student learning outcome that's better suited for assessment. And so we did that. We created a new student learning outcome in this past year. The previous one was, it was not great. It wasn't very well worded. And so we created a new one. And our new civic literacy student learning outcome is as follows: students develop civic literacy and the capacity to be community engaged learners who act in mutually beneficial ways with community partners. This includes producing learning artifacts, indicating understanding of the political, historical, economic, and sociological aspects of social change and continuity, thinking critically about and weighing evidence surrounding issues important to local, national, global communities, and participating in the broad range of community engagement and service learning courses. Sorry, a little bit of a mouthful. But essentially what we're doing with this is we've created this is the 3rd revision of our rubric that we're using that help supports this new civic literacy outcome. And we started by using a template from the Association of American Colleges and Universities, their value rubrics. And so we created our rubric from that, but then we're also using some information from the IUPUI Civic Minded Graduate 2.0 rubric. And I think we're pretty close. We may have our rubric set, and we may not need to revise again, I'm hoping, for a while. But it's undergone a lot of revisions through the years to try to capture if students are making gains with the student learning outcome. And so we have a assessment committee that uses the rubric and uses e-portfolios to review authentic student artifacts to see how students are making gains, or if students are making gains in the civic literacy outcome. And this is a part of the Civic Action Plan because frankly, our civic literacy student learning outcome has not received a lot of focus in previous years. It's hard to assess. It's hard to it's been hard for faculty to wrap their minds around it. I should say outside of service learning classes, because service learning classes we have focused on that, but we're tightening up the focus. Okay, and then the third strategy is to make civic learning routine across the disciplines. And so this is also using material from AAC&U, their Civic Prompts publication, which we hope to utilize for professional development within different departments, and also create additional professional development opportunities and programs focused on civic learning using the Civic Prompts. And then as a part of that, we're also potentially looking at broadening the range of what we formally recognize. So meaning that we have a well-structured service learning program and a designation process, and we've had that since 2004, and it's a really strong program, excuse me, but we have a whole range of civic and community engagement activities and efforts that are happening across the college that are not being captured very well. And when we were working on Carnegie, that was part, and as Kristen said, she's leveraging the Civic Action Plan to be able to gather a lot of that data. We're trying to figure out best methods to be able to gather that data, also leveraging the Civic Action Plan, so that we can report out on them, but then also for Carnegie, and also just so that we have a more centralized method to track not only what we're doing in service learning classes and what we're doing co-curricularly through our Payne Center for Service and Learning, but also this other range that might not be captured. As another part of this, we also participated in the Campus Compact Bringing Theory to Practice Dialogue project, and my colleague Sean Crossland has helped lead that efforts, and we've led several dialogues as a part of the creation of the Civic Action Plan, where we got input and feedback while we were creating the plan from our captains group. There's kind of a play on Civic Action Plan captains. And that was full of key stakeholders across the college, conversations with community partners, VPs, associate deans, and also staff. And so I think lessons learned, I already talked about that, is that there's a broad range of community engagement that's happening on a regular basis across campus. But we could make a lot more strides in capturing that and reporting it out and up. Okay, so the fourth strategy includes assessing community engagement, and that, assessing community engagement initiatives on community partner organizations. So sorry, this is the different lens of assessment in that we want to try to better determine community impact. And this might be partnering with community partners, either with focus groups or using collective impact modeling, some things of that nature. And this one, we're very much still working on our methods for it. And then the fifth strategy is to conduct college-sponsored, regularly scheduled days of service that provide an opportunity for staff to use their community engagement leave time. So our staff are allotted 24 hours in a year to be able to participate in community engagement activities. And we also had a collaborative work team that was formed to help increase the use of community engagement leave. And so a lot of what we heard from the staff dialogue was that staff want structured days of service that they can just plug into. They want it to be easy, and they want to just be able to plug into it. So we have a lot of initiatives that we're doing focused on this use of community engagement leave time, and really it falls under the under this strategy number 5, which is take specific steps to make reciprocal community engagement a cultural norm. So changing culture is, there's lesson learned, which is kind of a statement of the obvious. Changing culture is huge. And we're in it for the long haul. and it's going to take us a while to be able to get there. So implementation, I think I just have a little bit of time left. Implementation principles and practices. Really, it was serendipitous that the Civic Action Plan initiative rolled out at a time when our community engagement efforts aligned with larger college strategies. And we also have really key allies in many areas across the college. Our president, who's pictured in this slide, President Huffdelen, is a big supporter of our efforts. Our provost helped start the service learning program. We have key faculty, key administrators in many areas across the college that support our efforts. And then finally, the Civic Action Plan really has helped us catalyze and centrally mobilize our civic engagement efforts more than ever, so that we're moving forward in the same direction, right? So our main 3 centers of community engagement, myself with service learning and the Engaged Learning Program, Sean Crossland, who's in our Thane Center for Service and Learning, and Jen Seltzer-Stead, who's in our government and community relations area. In addition to, we have other folks in other areas who are supporting us, but the Civic Action Plan has really given us something for us to see, touch, feel, and move toward, and specific goals and action strategies that we can all get behind and move in the same direction. So essentially, just in summary, that we haven't had this type of synergy. We've done a lot of really good work through the years, but we haven't had this level of synergy occur with civic and community engagement. This is the first time that we've had this level of synergy. So the Civic Action Plan has really helped us as a platform for that, and we're grateful and excited to see where this goes. I think that's all the time I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Lucy. And don't forget, if you have questions for Lucy, we will have time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to put those in the Q&A box. I also just want to, I don't remember if Lucy mentioned, but Salt Lake Community College received the Carnegie Community Engagement classification in 2015. And so I think this was also well-timed for them in that sense, because they actually had already done a lot of really great legwork in terms of collecting information for that application, and that they could then utilize as they thought about their Civic Action Plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda. Brenda, your notes are showing, so I think you need to do display settings.
Well, that's interesting. Hold still.
Okay.
Because on my screen, it was not doing that. What are you seeing now?
You.
Great.
All right. Yeah, just do from beginning and I think we're good. Nope, it's still showing yeah.
We good?
Yeah, no, perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So it's my great pleasure to turn the time over to Brenda Kowaleski, a great colleague and friend.
Great, thanks, Alexis. So as Alexis mentioned, I'm at Weber State University. We're in Ogden, just north of Salt Lake City. And we do have a dual mission at our institution. We serve as the local community college for Northern Utah and as the regional university. So we have master's and bachelor's degrees that we are also awarding here. I think part of the reason why Alexis asked us to participate in this webinar is because not only do we represent a different type of institution, but we represent an institution that took a different approach to the Civic Action Plan than what you've just heard from my two colleagues across the state. So what I'm going to present to you today is a bit about the process of writing a Civic Action Plan that we are still in the middle of. We are still writing the Civic Action Plan. And it involves kind of three parts, well, two parts in particular, and then I'll talk about lessons learned. So we had to develop an infrastructure to really help us convene a bunch of folks in the community to help us write the Civic Action Plan, because we are choosing to write a plan with our community. And of course, we have to actually go through the process of writing the plan, and then eventually we will go through the process of implementing the plan. So I'm going to talk a bit about the structure, the plan itself, and then I'll talk a bit about lessons learned. Before I do that, though, I do want to make note of how we are thinking about this opportunity for writing a Civic Action Plan. Because again, I think it's a slightly different approach than what you've heard from my colleagues. So instead of us thinking about writing a Civic Action Plan as an opportunity to help us with our Carnegie classification process, which we've been engaged in twice now. We've been awarded the Carnegie classification in 2008 and again in 2015. Instead of thinking about the Civic Action Plan working to help us prepare for that Carnegie classification process, we actually thought about it in terms of complementing that process. Carnegie gives us an opportunity to look inward, internal processes. It's a self-study that we get to do. We decided the Civic Action Plan was going to give us an opportunity to focus more externally, so that we could start to think about what role should our university be playing in the community. And writing a Civic Action Plan with our community gave us the opportunity to exercise a convening role that we have been wanting to exercise as a regional university. So with that, let me talk a little bit about the Civic Action Network, the Ogden Civic Action Network, and the framework, the approach and the framework that we are building, which actually allows us or gives us the infrastructure that we need to write the Civic Action Plan. So we decided that we were going to take an anchor approach to writing a Civic Action Plan. We reached out to 6 anchor institutions in our community and asked if they would like to write the Civic Action Plan with us. Those anchor institutions include the local tech college, the Weber Morgan Health Department, our 2 local hospitals, the school district, and our city. We brought all of those folks together, and they are anchor institutions. They immediately identified that we don't only need anchors at the table, but we also need a bunch of ally organizations who are doing tremendous work in the community, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, local business owners, etc. So we see this Ogden Civic Action Network as a network of anchor institutions, ally organizations, and residents in a particular neighborhood that we decided is the focus for the Civic Action Plan. That neighborhood is the East Central Ogden neighborhood. It is about a 10-block square neighborhood in Ogden. It is the most densely populated area with about 15,000 to 16,000 residents. And it has about a 19% poverty rate in this particular neighborhood. So it's one of the most socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods, which is part of the reason why we decided that we needed to focus our time and energy there. But we also decided that anchors were doing some work in Ogden that we could leverage. So the city, for example, was working on housing and has committed $1 million per year for the next 5 years in this particular neighborhood under their umbrella of their quality neighborhoods work. Weber State, I don't know why this is so slow. Weber State, along with, yes, we're going to back up 1 second, or not. There we go. Weber State, along with the school district and United Way, have been focusing on the things that we need to do to help children be successful from cradle to career. And our health-oriented partners, anchors, have really been thinking about how to make healthcare more accessible to our Ogden residents and really healthy living experiences. So anchors already had an agenda for Ogden, And residents, when we talked to residents, they too confirmed that they were concerned about housing and health and education in particular. And so that's why we end up deciding that that neighborhood with those particular areas of focus are what we need to hone in on for our civic action plan. In order to write a plan and then eventually implement that plan, we knew that we were going to need a coordinating structure. So the university ended up creating an Office of Community Development in order to house the Ogden Civic Action Network. This decision was actually jointly made by all of the anchor institutions and the residents and the ally organizations that all serve on what has been a steering committee. They decided that the university was the most neutral place to house the structure. So we had to work for months to figure out the best structure and the best place or the best way to house a civic action network within the university structure. We figured it out. The doors will be opening January 1, and it will be governed by an Ogden Civic Action Network Board of Directors. That board of directors has a seat for every anchor institution, 2 for ally organizations, and 4 seats for residents in that particular neighborhood. The university is acting as the fiscal agent, so monies are coming into the university, but the board of directors is really making decisions about how those monies are spent. As you can see on this chart, we have 3 implementation teams: housing, health, and education, 1 for each of the 3 priority areas that were decided on. And those implementation teams are in the process of writing specific parts of the civic action plan that are relevant to their particular priority area. I'll come back to that as I talk about the civic action plan itself. So the planning process that we developed is a 9-step process. We started in spring of 2016 when our president signed the action statement. And that's really when we took the time to develop an understanding of our approach, an anchor institution approach with a place-based strategy. We took the next fall to gather information from anchor institutions and residents to really help us determine what our priorities would be. We had those priority areas set: housing, health, and education by December of 2016. And then really in the spring of 2017, we had the 3 implementation teams defined. And that's when they started their work on writing the civic action plan for their particular priority area. These teams, the smallest consists of about 10 people, and the largest consists of about 26. So they vary in size, but they have representation from all stakeholders: anchors, allies, and residents. Once those plans are developed, we will then be sharing them more broadly with the community for buy-in and tweaking and feedback before we publish it with the Campus Compact. So as I said, the plan has 3 areas of focus: health, education, and housing. And each of those areas to date have created a vision statement. You see the health vision right here. Quality of life and health are accessible to all, and life expectancy increases in this particular neighborhood. And they have 4 goals that they have defined to help them achieve that vision. You can see that they're focusing on reducing opioid-related deaths, increasing physical activity for all, increasing access to mental health resources, and increasing awareness of and use of healthy foods. So each of our teams have this, what we're calling a true north statement, a vision statement, and then they each have goals. You can see education's vision here. And of course, they're focusing on things like graduation, youth completion, and proficiency, and whatnot. Housing, same thing. There's a true north statement, a vision, and then they have 4 goals as well. I'm quickly moving through this because I really want to get to the lessons learned. And as you know, we're still in the process of writing this civic action plan. What we've learned in this process thus far, I'm sure there's still plenty of lessons to learn, is that institutionalizing the work is incredibly important. It's creating this Office of Community Development was something that our anchors, our allies, our residents said was absolutely essential to create credibility and sustainability to the work. There's no way that we're going to be able to accomplish these goals in 3 months or 3 years. It may take decades. So we need a structure that can sustain the work. And it lends credibility to the work when we know that there's an organization, an institution that is willing to serve as the fiscal agent and will continue to serve as the coordinator and convener for the work. So that was a really important lesson for us to learn. There's absolutely a challenge here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about lessons learned and some challenges that we've been facing. I heard my colleagues kind of talk about some of that, so I'm going to continue in that same vein. Figuring out the most appropriate structure. Institutions of higher ed are not necessarily structured to host what an initiative like the Ogden Civic Action Network. So creating an office was not exactly the easiest thing, but we have great people on the ground here who have really put their heads together to figure out what is the best way that we can leverage accounting. We can leverage our development office, our grants and contracts office at the institution and still give our anchor institutions governing power. And so it's been a challenge. We went through many iterations. It took about 9 months, but we finally got there. The place-based strategy that we're employing for writing a civic action plan and actually implementing it has been incredibly effective thus far. It is helping people to comprehend what it is that we're trying to do and where we're trying to focus the resources and how we might actually come up with measures of success. They can wrap their arms around it when we give them a geographic region. We also are feeling like the place-based strategy is going to help us build a pipeline from the community to our anchor institutions. These anchors are already serving residents in those institutions, but the expectation is that the individuals, the residents in the community will actually experience the anchor institutions differently. So maybe emergency rooms don't become the first place where they go seek medical help and healthcare. Another lesson around the anchor approach, we really do feel like it has been fantastic for coordinating and leveraging existing resources. These anchor institutions have been wonderful. We have been, as an institution of higher ed, we have been partnering with these anchors individually. Some of the anchors have been partnering with each other individually, but this anchor approach has given us the opportunity for us to coordinate our efforts and partner with each other simultaneously. So it reduces the burden of responsibility on any one anchor institution to feel like they have to help all boats rise in this particular neighborhood by themselves. One of the things that we've also learned is that the funding capacities vary from anchor to anchor. And so that's been interesting because our structure is set up in a way that we are asking all anchor institutions to bring the same funding dollars to the table. And, you know, some anchors have more funding capacity than others. So far, our anchors are saying that they are going to bring those dollars to the table. Stay tuned, we'll let you know if it's all equal. The holistic approach has also been really helpful because we're talking about health and education and housing. People, it resonates with them when we say that all of these things are intersecting and that we need to take a holistic approach to address these. And so that's resonating. What we are still challenged with is we need to think about how safety and employment fit into this picture. The residents did not identify those two, safety and employment, right off the bat. They identified health and housing and education as the issues that we need to be thoughtful about. But we know that safety and employment are important parts of this. And so we are still trying to figure out how to weave that in. Writing the Civic Action Plan and creating the structure have been great reminders that students have fantastic contributions to make. The logo that you're seeing on your screen right now for the Ogden CAN, the Ogden Civic Action Network, was created by a group of students. They now have something to put in their portfolio, so they are actually helping us build the structure. And students have also participated in a case competition around health. So our students from our Dumpke College of Health Professions were involved in a case competition where they generated population health strategies, and they used the East Central Ogden neighborhood as their case. And so those plans, those population strategies that the students created are now in the hands of our health implementation team, and they are now thinking through the interventions that students have proposed and trying to figure out which of those we will weave into our Civic Action Plan. True collaboration, this is a no-brainer, is incredibly hard and very time-consuming. This is why almost 2 years in, we are still writing a Civic Action Plan. But instead of being bound by the time, we decided it was more important that we really try and do this as a true collaboration. It's been incredibly rewarding, but incredibly time-consuming. And a challenge that we have is it is really hard to make sure that we have equitable resident representation. So when we think about the residents who are involved in our steering committee and our implementation teams, we are realizing that they are mostly residents who are in the middle to upper social classes. They're mostly middle class. And so we're not reaching all residents, a challenge that we know that still faces us, and we're thinking through some ways to incorporate all residents. My last comment is around sustainability and lesson learned here. We think we're off to a great start building infrastructure and having funding commitments from all anchor institutions. But we're talking about sustaining a civic action plan with interventions that are hopefully supposed to be addressing root causes in this particular neighborhood. So figuring out what's the appropriate timeline, what are the necessary interventions, how long do we need funding for those interventions. We're really trying to work the Civic Action Network out of a job. It's the classic sort of nonprofit conundrum, right? Trying to work ourselves out of a job, but and how we sustain that. So it is still a question in our minds. So in any case, that's what we have going on in Ogden and what we're doing at Weber State. And I'll turn it back to Alexis.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenda. And again, thank you to both Kristen and Lucy. So we did have a few questions come through asking for resources over the course of the different presentations. So I've committed, if everyone can send them to me, to distribute the Utah State survey that you sent out to faculty or to the stakeholders. And then Lucy, the rubric that you developed for your civic literacy learning outcome.
Yeah, I'm still putting the final touches on it. I actually have a committee meeting in a half an hour.
Okay.
Talk about it, and then we're going to present it to our student learning outcomes assessment, the college-wide student learning outcomes assessment committee in January. So, I mean, I can share it, but know that it's not quite absolutely signed, sealed, and delivered yet. Maybe
put like a draft watermark on it or something. And then I will also, I have access to the IUPUI Civic Minded Graduate 2.0 and obviously the Utah Campus Compact assessment tool. So what I probably will do, Piper, let me know if this is allowed or something we could do, is just create a Google Drive so that as we add things, people can be updated, but also that you can just come in there. I can share it publicly, and that way a link could go out when we send out the evaluation or the information on the recording from this webinar. So we have a few moments for questions. Are there any burning questions that others have? I'm sure I have plenty of them myself, but I want to let our participants have first crack at our wonderful panelists. And you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you haven't found that yet to ask questions. So Lucy, I did have one question. I know that you've had a pretty concerted and ongoing effort to create engaged departments. And so I was curious how that fits in to your civic action plan and which of the strategies that falls under.
Yes, creating engaged departments fits under STAR strategy number 3, which is making civic learning routine across the disciplines. So essentially it was a little larger focus, but yeah, creating engaged departments is a huge part of the work, because again, it just moves that work of random grassroots, a random mass of service learning classes to something that's more concerted, that's on a departmental level, that supersedes any one faculty member in any one class. So it's absolutely a part of this institutionalizing civic and community engagement. But we put it under number 3, but it also fits under number 5.
Right. Yeah.
Which is
well, that's the intersectionality of our work, right? And I think the other thing that's worth noting in that particular case is that when a department is designated at Salt Lake Community College, students who complete their associate's degree do receive a community or a civically engaged scholar designation. So it's a really cool program they have. If anyone's interested, I would encourage you to reach out to Salt Lake Community College to learn more. There was a question for Brenda, unless Lucy, you have something you want to say.
I was going to say, it just depends on the department.
Yeah.
Our one engaged department, occupational therapy assisting, yes, all the students graduated civically engaged scholars, but that is not going to be the case for all upcoming.
Okay.
It looks different for different departments is the point.
Right. But even that's an option, I think is pretty unique. So Brenda, Jordan is asking how you determine the neighborhood on which you would focus.
So the neighborhood is, we really chose it because it is one of the most socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods in Ogden. And we chose it because anchor institutions were already concerned about this particular neighborhood and better serving residents within that neighborhood. And one of our first partners that we reached out to was Ogden City, because the university and the city have a terrific relationship with one another and have partnered for years on a variety of different things. And the city really helped us identify that particular neighborhood because of the Quality Neighborhoods program that they were already putting into place, and the $1 million per year commitment for the next 5 years that they were already willing to bring to the table. So part of the underlying goals or kind of guiding principles for the Ogden Civic Action Network is leveraging existing resources. All anchors and residents and ally organizations come to the table saying, let's not build something new, let's leverage existing resources. So we are trying to leverage what the city is already doing in that particular neighborhood.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
We have another question regarding the leave for employees. Another institution has that, but they said that hours are approved at the discretion of supervisors. What are some steps you have taken to get buy-in from leadership and managers? And I believe, well, Weber State and Salt Lake Community College, I know, have that. I don't know if USU has that yet, but so I don't know if you want to take it first, Lucy, and then Brenda, you can chime in.
I was just going to say the opposite, Brenda.
Oh.
Go first, Brenda. Let me think about it for a minute.
Well, so the way in which it was initiated on our campus was actually from staff. And the staff, actually, it was a leader of our staff association. She became really passionate about making sure that staff had the opportunity to give back to the community. She went to the Center for Community Engaged Learning and said, hey, how might I be able to get this off the ground? So we had a staff member in a leadership position on campus attending President's Council, coming to a center on campus whose mission is all about community engagement. And those two things got married together, and they were able to take it up the ladder very quickly and tie it to mission fulfillment and fulfilling our commitment to the Carnegie Classification for Community Engagement. So Weber State releases staff for 8 hours, which is nothing compared to what Salt Lake Community College does. So, but it's 8 hours in a given year. And the buy-in came from staff leadership.
And Brenda, in your case, can that be any service, or does it have to be allied with a day of service that the CEL or the CCEL, excuse me, puts on? Or
Right, so it has to be aligned with the Center for Community Engaged Learning work. That was one of the stipulations, I have to say, that the administration came back and said, if indeed we're going to allow this, how are we going to verify it? How are we going to know that, you know, this is legitimate community engagement that people are really participating in? And so the Center for Community Engaged Learning ends up validating those hours, if you will. So it has to be aligned with center events.
perfect.
And again, to reiterate, the question was, how do you get buy-in from supervisors, right?
Right, like leadership, management, etc.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So originally, Sean Crossland, again on this call, helped lead the efforts to approve this policy. And right now, that's very much the work that we're engaged in with this collaborative work team, is to figure out how to increase the use of that. But of course, along with that comes buy-in. So some of the things that we've talked about that we're still working on is talking about this community engagement leave time. Well, actually, this one we will do is talking about the community engagement leave process in supervisor trainings, in what we call Bruin Beginnings, which is a new staff orientation, and in other professional development trainings. So getting the word out there. Sean has also worked to make the process easier and straightforward, because some of what we need for buy-in is just to make the process clear and well known, and also to market it and market the benefits of it. Also, in terms of the benefits, talking with supervisors and marketing how these benefits, like the ways in which employees can benefit from doing service and how that can benefit their job. You know, if it's not related to their job, whether there's still many benefits that employees can have and that the college can gain as well. Like I said, we're working on a marketing campaign, recognizing employees through like our employee recognition celebration, doing like friendly competitions between divisions. Those are some of the things that we're working on to increase the use of it and hopefully increase buy-in as well.
Great. And then Jennifer added something. Jennifer Seltzer-Stitt, who Lucy already mentioned, is in government and community relations. She wanted to add that, interestingly enough, we haven't had any significant pushback so far from supervisors or leadership. So I think particularly, I don't know what the type of institution the other person who asked the question is from, but particularly with a community college and the sort of values that Lucy described, it really is consistent with their mission, and so I think it can be little bit easier when you really are saying that your entire purpose is to serve the community, right? As a community college. So I think we're at time, so I want to be respectful of that. Again, thank you, Jennifer, for your comment, and thank you to all of our wonderful presenters. And we'll look forward, please look forward to receiving an evaluation. We would love to get your feedback, both on this and if you attend other webinars that are part of this series. And then we will also work on providing the resources that we've already described to all of you so you can access those in the near future. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your afternoon for those of you who are on the West Coast and Mountain, and then probably the rest of you are heading into evening pretty soon here. So thank you very much. Take good care.
Bye.